They do not want to see any power, be it secular or Islamic or pseudo Islamic, in any way whatsoever that could potentially in the future threaten its security.
The generals that were killed, the scientists that have been killed, they were trying to avoid this fate. They were trying to avoid going to war. They wanted to stay in power. And because of all of this, they did everything possible not to defend the Muslims of Gaza. And subhanAllah, they died anyway. They're humiliated and they are at war. Everything that they were trying to avoid.
Is Iran going to engage in a real response? Because if it is, you cripple the infrastructure and economy of Israel. They don't have the land, geography, they don't have the demographic, they don't have the strategic depth.
If Iran is finished, the only, let's say, viable threat to that region that still has something that the Muslim world can look up to is either Turkey or Pakistan. And there is no way that they will not try to neutralize Pakistan. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Salatu wassalamu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Dear brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh, and welcome to Islamic Oasis Live. This is an emergency session in many ways. As you all know, brothers and sisters, I'm sure you're following what's happening in the Middle East again. Now, Iran is being hit. Well, Iran has been hit, but it seems like now it's all-out war. Where this will take, there's a lot of questions being asked whether this could actually lead to regime change also, because there are a lot of problems within Iran. And of course, this was a preemptive attack by Israel, backed by the US, in many ways probably even pushed by the US. And it's a very it's in some ways it's being said that it's taken Iran back maybe a good 15 to 20 years in their nuclear program, or even the damage to infrastructure and things like this. Many scientists have been killed. Some major generals have been killed. Not sure if Iran was that naive regarding the threats that were constantly being put out there. But to discuss all of this and the developing situation in Iran, we have our brother Sharif is here. You've seen him on the YouTube channel Alchemy. He's a political analyst. He's an observer of politics around the world. He's a Muslim activist that is very active in UK, and keeps an eye on what's happening in the Muslim lands. So once again, Brother Sharif, welcome back to Islamic Oasis Live.
Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Sheikh, I didn't think that Israel, with everything that is happening on its borders, whether it's Lebanon or Gaza situation, and internal situation in Israel itself, that it had the wherewithal to do what it's doing. I mean, a preemptive attack on Iran. I mean, this is sustainable, or is this something that? I mean, so give us a picture. What's taking place? What's going on?
So it's a good question that you ask in terms of whether Israel has these capabilities to do all of what it's doing. But the reality is that Israel is not the only. It's not Israel. It's really America. And Israel knows that America fully backs it. It backs it with weapons, it backs it with money, backs it with moral and political support. So this is America with Israel doing these actions. And so now when Israel knows that it's only a small country, but it also knows that if it's backed by the world's only superpower, then it has the capability to do these things, because any blowback will be protected by America. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that it knows that its borders are secure. So whether that's the border with Jordan, or whether that's the border with Egypt, or generally with Lebanon, generally at this moment in time, that they are secure. They're not going to face any problems. Egypt is not going to move. Jordan's not going to move against them. And in fact, Jordan itself will be a bulwark in order to try to defend Israel and Israel's territory by shooting down, drones and missiles that are coming towards Israel, and allowing American bases to also operate within Jordanian skies to shoot down Iranian missiles. So it's not just Israel. This is the issue. It's not just this country of 9 million people, 7 million of whom are Jews, 2 million are Arabs, that are undertaking this action, very small country, very small landmass, but rather it's the backing of America and generally the West, but America specifically, and also fundamentally the backing and support of the Arab rulers within that region. If it didn't have any of these things, and actually, I would say the most fundamental thing that it has, which is the backing of the Arab rulers, if it didn't have that, then it wouldn't be able to forget about launching missiles against Iran, because it wouldn't be able to engage their airspace. It would be violating the airspace of Jordan or Saudi if it goes through that route. It'd be facing problems on the border of Egypt. It would be facing potential problems regards to Jordan and what happens there and with Syria. But because it doesn't have those problems, because it knows it can operate without any problems on its borders, on its security from the Arab rulers, then it can do what it does against Iran, and also it can do what it does against Gaza as well. There is, again, like I said, there's no blowback. If Egypt was to say we're cut off the Suez Canal, if Jordan says we're going to stop any goods bound to Israel crossing our border, if UAE says we're going to stop any Israeli ships docking at our ports, if Saudi says we're going to stop any land-based goods traveling from the from the UAE ports to Israel, we will stop that. Then Israel itself would not be able to operate. Yeah, even if it had the backing of America.
Sheikh, Iran at this point, I mean, yani, let's say, fine, Israel obviously is acting under the cover of US. That's a given. Did Iran not expect this? I mean, is this because, I mean, if you look at the damage that's been done, it's really it's bad. It's real bad. Uh, taking out of scientists. They've hit almost 100 airstrikes in less than probably 5, 6 hours, and now it's been almost
And the senior commanders of the armies, isn't it, as
senior
well?
commander of the armies. Um, Sheikh, I mean, this is what what was Iran thinking that there'll be no preemptive in this thing? That America will not allow this to happen. Talks will continue. What such a naive decision making within the infrastructure of the regime. Is this the real level of it? Is this the mindset inside Iran? I mean,
Iran, it's crazy to see what's actually happened in terms of Iran's responses. And we've seen this. We've seen this over the past 2 years now with regards to the massacres that take place in Gaza and the response of Iran. We saw this regards to Hezbollah, the fact that they took out the leadership of Hezbollah within a very short period of time. They undertook the walkie-talkie and the pager
yeah,
attacks,
yeah,
which was a complete humiliation against Hezbollah and therefore Iran as well. We've seen that regards to the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh in
yeah,
Tehran,
in
in the very
Tehran.
capital city of Iran.
Yeah,
Yeah, so we've seen this over and over again. We've seen the retreat of Iran. We've seen the lackluster responses that Iran have undertaken. Where it was, I think it was October the first time in 2024 or so, and then, or sorry, it was April, and then later on in October in 2024, there was two responses by Iran where they sent over drones, and then in April, and then later on in the year as well. So we've seen this type of thing, and we've seen how they pre-announced these types of strikes. We've seen how they've been holding back in order you know, to stop a real effective response from being taken place from themselves. It comes across, and it has come across in the two previous, strikes that Iran have placed against Israel, which were in retaliation to the response that Israel did against them. That those responses were seen as more theater, fireworks, or theatrical responses, a show of strength, rather than actually trying to cripple and create damage against Israel. In fact, in both those strikes, the one I think in April and the later one in October, they resulted in zero Israeli casualties or IDF casualties. Yeah. So we've seen that this is what they do. And as soon as they've done the response, what was their response? Iran. Now we're finished. Yeah. So they send out a volley of drones, a volley of maybe missiles as well. And then that's it. After 20 minutes, maybe half an hour, they've done their action. And then they'll say, right, we've finished our response. We've now satisfied our ego. We've now satisfied the hurt that we faced. So therefore, we no longer have to engage. So they've always attempted to try to de-escalate. That's the key point. De-escalate the conflict between itself and Israel. Even with Hezbollah, when Hezbollah was striking and attacking against Israel, and it was argued at the time by Hassan Nasrallah that they would not engage in a ceasefire unless there's a ceasefire with Gaza, with Hamas in Gaza, that the way that they responded, Hezbollah, it was a tame response. It
Mm.
was a response that didn't use the full capabilities of Hezbollah against Israel. It was a response that was basically to try to galvanize the public opinion amongst the Arabs and the Muslims around the world, as opposed to effectively harming and damaging Israel. Yeah. So it was always done like that because they didn't want to escalate it to a full blown war, but at the same time, they didn't want to be seen as not helping their brothers and sisters
And
in
that's what I'm
Gaza.
saying. That's what I'm saying, Sheikh. Look,
They're
let's
in a
say
no man's land. They're not acting, and they're trying to pretend as though they're doing something. So
no,
they're
but
in a position where they're not doing anything, basically.
inside Iran, what do you think is happening as far as the public opinion regarding the regime itself? I've heard that even the Israelis and both Israelis and the Americans are in contact with even the Pelvi family. They are, I mean, just now CNN report before the show I was looking up, they're talking about maybe even regime change, and U.S. is now really looking into this situation. Uh, w- so, Sheikh, but there's real hatred for the regime inside Iran,
Yeah.
and
Okay. Yeah.
that's one thing. But the other thing also, it seems, I mean, the way, yeah, the whole intelligence apparatus of Iran has been compromised. This level of you know incompetency is beyond belief. I mean, now on the top of that, they're hitting from Iraq. U.S. has been saying that we are removing our officials from Iraq. We are, there's high level of threats. There's high level. Did, did Iran did they just pass this by, thinking this is just talk and this is they're not going to take the threats coming from the U.S. seriously?
So I think the issue with Iran and the Iranian regime, their primary concern, and how we can understand and analyze, their objectives, their actions, their strategy is based upon their primary concern. The primary concern is preserve what they see as the Iranian Revolution in 1979, the
Mm.
so-called Islamic
So just
Revolution.
preserve the regime.
Preserve the regime, preserve the clerics who currently now form the political class of that society primarily, preserve their positions within government, and preserve, what they created in 1979. That's their primary concern. The way they operate within Hezbollah, the way they operate within Yemen, the way they've operated in statements and actions against Israel can all be seen as a way to leverage, negotiation tactics, to leverage certain positions to negotiate for softer sanctions, for a better relationship, so that they can preserve their regime. That's their primary
Mm.
main goal. So for them, there is no value to engage in a all-out war with Israel because that puts them under threat. Yeah, that's threatening. They would rather undertake actions to be seen as being strong, and that's for internal consumption here, because now they look weak. They looked weak with Ismail Haniyeh. They've looked weak now with Hezbollah and the fact
I
that they
mean,
had to.
Soleimani was killed just prior to
That's
that. I mean, these are
that's
major,
right.
major military political figures
Yeah, and Suleiman, when he was killed in Iraq.
in Iraq, yeah, Baghdad.
Yeah, yeah. When he was killed, Donald Trump was president, and Donald Trump he said in a speech, he sort of, obviously everything that he said, you always take with a pinch of salt, but I believe what he said is true. He said that Iran had informed them that they're going to attack a particular American base within Iraq. And he said that's fine. This was the agreement that was supposedly made between America and Iran because and this is what Trump's saying is because he said that Iran had to be so seen to respond, and so they removed their troops, removed people from that air base, allowed the missiles to be dropped, and then Iran then said, you know, we've eye for eye, you know, we've now responded to the killing of our general. Yeah. So this is what Trump himself has said. And so it's always a case of they're in a position to try to preserve their regime. They've got to preserve their regime in two senses. One, externally, for people who want to remove, quote unquote, the Islamic regime or the clerical regime within Iran, externally, America, Israel primarily. And secondly, internally, they need to be seen as to be strong because of what you said. Because if they are seen to be weak, then what's going to happen is that people are going to look for a different regime, a different system of governance, or call for revolution or change in one form or another. So they have to be seen to be strong internally, yeah, and also they have to be seen as people who can de-escalate so they're not too much of a threat externally. At the same time, and this is important to note, America likes Iran to be seen as a threat
Mm.
because it pushes the Arab regimes, primarily the Gulf regimes like Qatar or UAE or even Saudi Arabia, to fall in line with American security plans. This is what they want to do because for America to maintain control and influence over these Gulf countries and Arab countries generally, having this Shia Iranian threat that could take them over is advantageous because then you have negotiating bargaining tools in order to turn around and push and and present yourself as a protector for these countries. And so Iran becomes this scarecrow. I don't obviously in Britain we know what scarecrow. I don't know if you know scarecrow in America.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, of course.
it's just he's a person. He's not even a person. He's just a model made out of
Yeah,
straw,
farmers use
put
it here. Yeah,
clothes
sure.
on to scare away the birds from the seeds. And that's what Iran operates as. It operates as America's scarecrow within the region to push Gulf countries under American influence. And so America likes that. Now, saying this, there was a document, policy document, very famous policy document now. It's been talked about lots, called Project 2025
Oh
by the
yeah,
Heritage Foundation.
yeah.
Heritage Foundation, it was debated and discussed by the Democrats. They tried to use this against Donald Trump because of its internal policies. But what was interesting about this document, it has a lot of foreign policy discussions as well. Yeah, so people who don't know who Heritage Foundation is, right wing Republican type think tank, yeah, that supports sort of the Republican Party. That came to prominence during Ronald Reagan's era, claimed that a number of its proposals were, brought into policy by Ronald Reagan and also other governments, Republican governments. And a lot of the people that wrote this report, the Project 2025 report, were former employees of Donald Trump in his first term in office. So they, I think it was like 144 people were involved in the report, and about 120 or so, or maybe a little bit less, but over 100 were actually people, former employees or part of the administration of Trump in his first term in office. So they're quite influential. And they talk about Iran and what to do with regards to Iran. Now, America knows that it cannot engage in a ground warfare like it did in Iraq, like it did in Afghanistan, because in both situations they failed. Yeah, after 20 years, they didn't succeed.
Mm.
So he knows that type of approach of ground warfare is not successful, and they definitely cannot do that with Iran because Iran is not like Iraq. Iraq went through 10 years of brutal sanctions, demilitarized a lot of the, military, the armed forces, and even then they struggled. Yeah. Afghanistan didn't really have a state. It was a militia that had taken control over a territory. And even then they struggled. And 20 years later, they had to withdraw and the Taliban came back into power. Iran's not like that. It hasn't had those same types of difficulties. So it cannot engage in ground warfare. So what it said in this policy document, it said that we need to look at undertaking surgical strikes, special operations, yeah, support for dissident groups, and support for political movements within the country to call for the topple of the regime. So what we have seen in the last few days, or since last night or whatever, is we have seen this type of approach, surgical strikes that have taken place against, key individuals, against infrastructure, like the nuclear facilities, as well as the claims that there was covert operations that took place through one intelligence gathering, and also secondly, apparently they planted drones,
Yeah.
explosive drones within Iran. So this must have been taking place over months, if not over last year or so, for them to have been able to achieve that, and they must have a lot of connections on the ground within that country to do that. So therefore, what we're seeing is the same type of playbook. So the next thing they'll do is they'll try to push for the Iranian public and Iranian secular political movements to try to oust out the clerics. Yeah. So
So
for them,
you
it's
you
about
you
trying
you
to
you
weaken the confidence in the eyes of Iranian people.
so you're saying so okay, so regime change is a big possibility.
Yeah. So that is the goal. That is the general goal
So
of
then what
America.
happens, Sheikh? What kind of what are we looking at? Monarch being put in place. What type of regime are we talking about if this is the plan? I mean, well, obviously someone that's pro West, probably pro Israel. But let's say let's look at
Pro-West,
this.
pro-Israel, demilitarized, weak, yeah,
I mean,
will no longer rise as a threat to Israel militarily, becomes weakened within the regional capacity. I think that type of concerted effort, maybe it would occur soon. We don't know. Wallahu alam, yeah. But I think if Saudi engages in a normalization treaty, then they don't need that scarecrow as much within the region, and so they will probably be very concerted efforts to remove the regime within Iran and change it to be a secular regime. Something like it could be a monarchy like King Abdullah's of Jordan, or it could be President Sisi, of Egypt. Compliant, weak leadership that ultimately depends either for its security or for its economy upon the West, yeah, upon Western powers, so they can never rise again to be a threat to the hegemony within that region, Western hegemony within that region.
Sheikh, you think the people of Iran will accept this? I mean, especially looking at the people, the Iranian people are very well. I mean, the Iranian Revolution, the
Yeah.
79, 80 revolution, yeah, it did have an impact on the people there. There's no question about that. Uh, but obviously now it's been a few decades, a whole different, different generations now, even probably even from the what they call the Revolutionary Guard and all these guys. I'm sure, Sheikh, for the type of infiltration that has taken place, I mean, this means in almost every sector of the military, there is somebody working for the West already. Okay, so that's one question. I mean, I don't know how true that is, but the revolution itself, when Khomeini comes in power, can one say that Iran was already compromised at that time?
So this So obviously, looking out in terms of the Iranian Revolution, why it occurred, we had the expansion of Soviet Union,
Right.
which was a communist country at that time. It was expanding across into Afghanistan, so it was around about the same time, 79, 80 as well. During this period of time, there was concerns of communist infiltrations within the Iranian society, in which the biggest opposition movement to the Shah weren't actually the Islamic, sort of the quote unquote the Islamic clerics. It was actually the Communist Party, yeah,
Hmm.
the communists and socialists. And what they did with regards to Afghanistan is what America was concerned with, which was, a revolution or a popular movement, socialist communist movement, where you see a severe crackdown, violence by the government against it, that gives the pretext for Soviet Russia to come in to quote unquote protect the people and protect the revolution. Yeah. So they were concerned because America was concerned that you've got Afghanistan, then you've got Iran, and then you've got the whole of the Gulf, isn't it? So this would have been major situation. So this is why they say, and there's a lot of credence to this, that Khomeini himself, who was an asylum seeker living in Paris,
Right.
So he went from Iran to Iraq. Then I think there was an assassination attempt in Iraq. He then fled to France. Paris then, gave him asylum. So here's a guy who's meant to be somebody who's against the West or against America, against Western interests, all of these types of things, and yet he's been given asylum. And not just been given asylum, he's allowed to operate politically, yeah, within this area. At the same time, just before the Iranian Revolution and his travel back to Iran, he was met by CIA agents. Yeah, this has now become public knowledge. It's in the public
Mm.
sphere now. It's been released. CIA files have released that actually they met. And one of the discussions that supposedly took place was that Khomeini said, look, I'm not going to become a threat to America. He's trying to appease them. Now, America, whether they believed him or not, is a separate issue. But what they did believe, and this comes from the sociological outlook here, they believed in this idea that one of the what secularization takes place through modernization and urbanization. So as societies become more modern, technologically advanced, and urbanized away from the rural areas, they become more secular. Yeah, it just becomes inevitable. They looked at Iran and they said Iran is a relatively rich country, got a lot of gas, got a lot of oil, has the capacity to urbanize and develop. And it was pretty developed even prior,
To the
during the Shah's
revolution.
time, etc. So they assumed that what would happen is you would create an Iranian revolution, Islamic revolution, which would then subdue the communists, prevent communists from coming in because the communists are atheists. Yeah, they're not going to get any traction. And then over the years, Iranian revolution or the Iranian regime, the Islamic Republic of Iran will secularize. This was the theory. This is what they thought. But what they found in practice was that this didn't occur. In fact, it was only just a few years ago that we had Ahmadinejad, who won in multiple terms in office, and he was seen as a hardline. And I remember then, prior to his first election and prior to his second election win, both times the Western media was saying that there is a strong secular, moderate, population that wants to see a more Western inclined. And each time, the majority of the population, they were generally seen as fair elections, all voted for a quote unquote hardliner. Yeah.
Mm.
So this idea that there's this the majority of the population are secular, they want to adopt a secular position. I'm not saying that there aren't people like that, and you're probably aware, and I'm certainly I see it here in the UK that after the Iranian Revolution, a lot of the secular Iranians left the country.
All right. I mean,
Yeah,
they're here in LA
yeah.
and they
So
have rights because never mind.
but yeah, but so this is what the situation is that they secular. They didn't want to live under an Islamic quote unquote regime. We know it's not Islamic, yeah. So let's be very clear about that. But they didn't want to be seen as they would live there. They moved out, and I'm sure a number of secular, figures still remained within Iran, and there's certain popular. There are certain positions and opinions and movements within Iran that does want to modernize, or would not modernize, but secularize and liberalize their society and move away from quote unquote Islamic society, etc. So I'm not denying that. And I'm not denying in terms of the fact that it even may be sizable. Whether it's a majority or not, I don't know. Wallahu alam. I doubt it's the majority. However, what's always the case and has always been pushed is that there's been an over exaggeration within Western media and within Western political elites that this is the majority. And we've seen this prior as well to like Iraq, when
Mm.
uh, you had Iraqis going to the British government as well as the American government saying, if you remove Saddam Hussein, we'll create this great flourishing, Arab Iraqi city that will be democratic, yeah, a democratic, flourishing society and country and state that will be pro-Western, because actually we will support you. We'll come out on the streets and embrace the American and British and Western soldiers who got rid of Saddam Hussein. And the complete opposite happened. So what is being said and what we're seeing in the media and the Western media and what's being said by Iranian dissidents who left the country in 79 onwards to the West is not necessarily reflective of what the people hold within that country. Yeah. So that's just generally how
But
to look at it.
if we look at, let's see a little bit on Israel, um, this must, I mean, this has to have impact on the I mean, on the Israeli population also, right? I mean, so, look, no matter what happens, Iran is there to stay. Iran is not going anywhere. But fine, it might be a bit difficult. Maybe they're going to have to deal with the circumstances. But if you look at the Israeli society, Sheikh, how long can they continue like this? You know, just barrage of missiles constantly coming down on them from all over the place. The hatred continues to grow. Um, every few minutes the sirens are going on. Is this what kind of society is this, Sheikh? Where they're constantly living in fear, uh, even though surrounded by very friendly regimes, protected by them. But there has to have, I mean, there has to be a psychological, you know, effect on
Yeah,
the
I
masses.
agree. I agree. I think the whole raison d'etre of the state of or this Zionist entity was the fact that Jews need to be protected. They need a homeland for themselves because they can't live within Europe because the Europeans and the Westerners will end up genociding them or, committing another Holocaust. That's why they can't live with them. So they need their own society. So what do? You go to the Middle East, you go to the Arab countries, and you go to the third holiest area for the Muslims, Balad, you know, uh, Beit al-Maqdis, which is part of Balad al-Sham, and establish your own entity there, kick out 750,000 Muslims, and think that that's going to secure your future. It's not. It's obviously not. It makes no rational sense. It would have been made more rational sense to turn around and say, you know what, up until recently, which is 2020, the latest census. In 2010, the last census, world census, the majority of Jews lived in America. Yeah. And now it's only recently now that it's just slightly more that are living in Israel. Yeah. So you'd think, well, actually, it makes more sense. America supports them, has given them funding, etc. Maybe that's probably the best place for them to have established their state and their society. So it doesn't make any rational sense, that situation. The other issue is that Israel as a land is incredibly small. You compare that to Iran, it's very small. What this means is its military installations, its key infrastructures are more vulnerable and
Mm,
also are in the heart or closer to civilian centers than compared to Iran. Iran has mountainous regions, can bury many of their missiles under the mountains, and they have these underground mountain bases which are incredibly difficult to target by America or Israel. Israel doesn't have these types of what we call strategic depth. So it doesn't have that. It has a very small landmass. It's very, small population of 9 million officially, but 7 million are Jews.
mm.
Yeah. So that means 2 million are Arabs. In the West Bank, it's 3.2. And up until recently, of last 2 years, it was 2.2 million. Now they're saying it's 1.8 million. It's
Yeah, yeah.
increased within Gaza. What that means is that in historic Palestine, as we call it, the population of Palestinians is greater than the population of Jews today. Yeah. Or
Mm,
at least now, maybe 50-50 because of the massacres and the genocide they've committed in Gaza. But prior to that, the majority were actually Palestinians. This is not just from me saying this. Times of Israel did a census data and said if you add the Arabs within Palestine, West Bank, Gaza, and what they call the Zionist entity now, then they would be the majority. So they have a problem of demographics, small population, small landmass, military installations which are more vulnerable because obviously smaller landmass it's harder to hide them. And also the fourth thing is that their infrastructure, like for example the energy infrastructure, there is only 9 power plants in that country that supplies almost the entirety of their energy. 9 power plants. There's 5 desalination plants within Israel that supplies the vast majority, maybe 90 odd percent of its clean water. That means that these are vulnerable institutions, infrastructural
mm,
points.
mm.
Now, if Iran, and this is the thing, is Iran going to engage in a real response? Because if it is, then what you do is you send your firepower, your ballistic missiles against the 9 power plants and 5 desalination plants, and suddenly then you cripple the infrastructure and economy of Israel.
Yeah.
Now we know
So
the quarter, just so one five, a quarter of the population, over a quarter of the population of Israel, Jews, have dual nationality.
mm, yeah, of
Hundreds of
course.
thousands of Jews leave Israel in the last time there was a barrage that took place by Iran. They flooded to the Tel Aviv airport to leave the country. Yeah. So it this what I'm trying to say is this is what you said. How long can they suffer and engage in this situation? If there was a real response, they wouldn't be able to engage in that situation. They don't have the land geography, they don't have the demographics, they don't have the strategic depth. Yeah, and like I said, they just don't have the population size as well.
Sheikh, what is the problem that U.S. is this a U.S. problem or an Israeli problem as far as the infrastructure that Iran wants to build for the nuclear infrastructure, let's say. Yeah, I mean, and they
Yeah.
keep telling them that this is peaceful, this is for electricity, generating electricity and all of that. Iran has always been there for American interest. They've always supported, whether it's Northern Alliance in Afghanistan, whether it was Iraq. They are the ones who, helped Americans do what they did in Iraq. Gulf War, fought Iraq, um, so many times over. And Sheikh, but then even after all of this, is it the Americans? I mean, the Americans are willing to, allow Pakistan have nuclear weapons, but they're saying no to Iran. I'm having hard time believing that they don't. They believe that Iranian regime. I mean, is it unstable? Is it there are maybe within that regime there are personalities that they don't trust. What is it about Iran that they worry so much about, Sheikh, even though it has been there for their interest and for them majority of its existence since the revolution?
Well, obviously, I think the first issue is that there's an ideological difference, isn't there? So even if we turn around and say politically they're aligned, because for Iran, they want to preserve the Iranian Revolution, and that aligns
I mean,
with.
but what does that actually mean, Sheikh? I mean, what have they done with the revolution? Any,
Well,
okay,
it means
now we
that the
have Wilayat
cleric,
al-Faqih, and
yeah,
what in the world is this thing anyway?
yeah,
As
yeah.
far
So
as that could threaten American interests in
yeah.
any
So, but for obviously for the Iranian, what it means by preserving the Iranian Revolution for them, it doesn't just mean about from an ideological point of view that we believe in, like you said, the concept of wilayat al-faqih and the idea of a Shia Ja'afri state, etc. It's not about that. For them, the clerics were able to get into positions of economic and political power.
Mm,
You change the regime, they're no longer going to that political class now are no longer going to be in that positions of political and economic power within that country anymore. Yeah. So it's a self-preservation issue for them. Their position and their power and the economy, yeah, and the control. That's why they want to preserve it. For America, America says, yeah, fine. We acknowledge that on certain issues and certain questions, like when it came to the 2002 2001 war in Afghanistan, Iran provide intelligence to America to attack the Taliban. When it came to the first Gulf War, Iran kept Iraqi weapons to help prevent Iraq from defending itself effectively. Yeah. Also, in the second Gulf War, 2003, Iran provided intelligence and
yeah.
logistic support against Iraq and for the Americans. And we've seen in other situations how Iran used as
I
the
mean,
American scarecrow within the region.
Yeah, Muqtada Sadr comes. Heck, it's amazing to
Yes.
hear Muqtada Sadr's statements this morning. We have nothing to do. He just washed his hands. He just said, "Hey, we have nothing to do with this," and we. I mean, to hear Muqtada Sadr kind of just walk away, and this is the guy that was groomed He was bought
Yeah.
into Iran over and over so that he can, and basically to stop the resistance in Iraq. I mean,
Well, Sheikh, just really quickly on that point, because maybe for the audience who are not aware, Muqtada Sadr, he was leading a Shia militia
right.
that saw America as the enemy and was fighting against America and would not engage in a peace process until Iran said, you know what, you're still young, you need to come back to Iran, or not come back because he's Iraqi Shia. You need to come to Iran and we'll educate you. And
Right.
when he came to Iran, the Shia militia basically died down,
Yeah,
no
the
longer
Mahdi militia,
engaged
they
in
called it. I
fighting.
remember the
And then when he
militia.
came back to Iraq, like you said, he said, right, we engage in a peace process. We're not going to fight against the Americans anymore.
So, Sheikh, I
Yeah.
mean,
So there again, Iran's serving American interests as an example of that again.
right now,
Yeah.
so what Sistani, I don't know where in the world Sistani is now. I mean, I wonder what he's thinking with all of this going on. Sheikh, when we look, Americans are very good at creating these religious looking institutions. And I'm saying that because we know what real Islam is. But here, in Saudi Arabia, they create, the so-called Kibar al-Ulama, this whole institution that's supposed to make Saudi Arabia look Islamic. But obviously, people are not fooled anymore. In Iran, this Wilayat al-Fiqh issue. Sh- Sheikh, are they, is US now, uh, I mean, they're cleaning up the Wahhabi Islam from Saudi Arabia, in the name of, I guess, a whole new Middle East. So, even you hear things in Saudi Arabia as if you don't need Wahhabism anymore. They used it when they wanted it. And now, is this the same thing what we're seeing in Iran in the name of nuclear, whatever? Just let's get rid of these this type of institutions, and then what, Sheikh? I mean, Syria is already kind of. I mean, and look, even in Syria, I mean, this guy who's now running Syria was, ex Al Qaeda. I mean, it's weird to even discuss it. This guy. So you have, Muhammad Jolani sitting in the seat where he is. Muqtada al-Sadr is talking nonsense like this. Wilayat al-Fiqh is falling apart. Sheikh, the whole region is being reshaped for uh, what new Middle East, new what's the deal, Sheikh?
So, so you asked the original question, which is similar to basically from this point as well, which is why does America seek regime change within Iran? Why can't it just keep the status quo as it is? Yeah,
Yeah,
I
I
think
guess that's yeah.
fundamentally that's what it is. And I said, and I think there's a few things. One is the fact that there's an ideological difference between secularism and what even
What
whatever
Iran stands for.
version of Islam that is perceived as more theologically backed state. So there's a problem with regards to that because they want to secularize the world. Francis Fukuyama famously wrote the book The End of History. Yeah. And in that book, he basically made the point, which is that now communism is dead. Now,
Is it?
human history has, well, yeah, this is right. This was in the 1990s after the fall of Soviet Union. And then he's saying that now with human history has gone through all these different political and theological ruling systems and structures and now settled upon capitalism and liberalism and democracy. This is it. End of history. This is the idea, isn't it? That you create a situation where everybody in the world agrees upon one ideological basis of the world. And so Iran and America, falls within that. Saudi falls within that. It's all about secularization, liberalization to create that one civilizational aspect within the world, which is
Mm.
dominant, which is liberalism. Because if you can dominate them intellectually, then you can dominate them politically and economically as well. Yeah.
So
That's the
it's
reality.
dominate them intellectually.
Yeah. And so that's the first thing. The second thing is this is that America is now moving towards a situation where it wants to start to reduce its military expenditure and its military footprint around the world because of the expense that it has to pay. There was a famous There's a famous political philosopher of the 18th century, I think he was, yeah, 18th century in the 1700s. His name was Adam Ferguson, and he talked about, and it's a very famous statement. It's now come in, some modern now Ferguson like historian. He talked about this as the Ferguson principle or Ferguson law. Yeah, and what it is Adam Ferguson. He said when a power spends more on its debt servicing than it does on its military, then it ceases to become a great power anymore. Yeah.
Mm,
So
mm,
America has a $36 trillion debt and it pays hundreds of billions of dollars per year just on the interest of that debt.
mm,
And the interest of that debt is greater than the military expenditure of its debt. Sorry, military expenditure. So it pays more on the interest than it does on military per year, which is about $380 billion, I think it is a year, something like that. So, and some say that America passed that point in 2022. Some say it was in 2024. Yeah. From my recollection, it's 2022. So now they're spending more. So the concern now for America is how do we maintain this empire? Now, most empires, not most, all empires, bar one, have always fallen once its empire goes into debt. The only empire that hasn't fallen, which is American Empire, it hasn't fallen, even though it's in debt. So British Empire, the Roman Empire, even we don't call it an empire, but the Ottomani Khilafah fell into debt. All of these things, it affects the sustainability of the empire. The American Empire has been able to do something different, and primarily it's based on how they made the dollar the universal, international basis for trade. Yeah, the currency for trade, the dollar. So
mm,
therefore, it could print money to service its own debt or increase its debt because it wouldn't have negative or ultimately hugely negative ramifications upon its economy because everybody needs the dollar. So there's always a demand for the dollar to engage in trade. There's always demand for the American financial services because all financial trade goes through the American financial services, the banking sector within America. But now we're at the situation where its expenditure, particularly within having bases within the Middle East, yeah, so you got Jordan, Qatar, Dafra Air Base in UAE, Saudi Air Base, the aircraft carrier in the Suez Canal. Yeah, I think there's aircraft carrier in the Strait of Hormuz as well. So they've got numerous bases around the Middle East, but around the world, in fact. Now they want to create a security pact, which is basically get Arab countries to be able to do the job what America is doing with its bases, but by the Arab regimes doing it themselves, paying for it themselves. Yeah. So this is what they're trying to do. Egypt, Saudi, UAE, and Israel to form a security pact in which they are able to maintain the security of that region themselves. And therefore, that frees up American military expenditure within that region. Yeah.
mm. Oh,
In
meaning
that
regionalized.
situation, in that
I,
situation, Iran's role as that scarecrow becomes a problem because having them creating that fear with Saudi Arabia and the other Gulf countries makes it the case that America, therefore, are pressurized to keep their bases there. To remove that threat, to bring them into this secular world order, as they call it, Western inclined, Western supporting, um, liberal order, then as a result, they can implement this plan. That's a second aspect of it. First one's ideological, second one is from a military expenditure point of view. The third one is the fact that Israel, Zionists, are the most arrogant people on the face of the earth. We see this. The
mm,
Zionists. I'm not talking
mm,
about old Jews, I'm talking about Zionist specific. Some of the Christian Zionists, some of them are Jewish Zionists, some are secular Zionists, whatever. The Zionists. They're the most arrogant people on the earth. They do not want to see any power, be it secular or Islamic or pseudo Islamic, in any way whatsoever that could potentially in the future threaten its security. So they will look to try to weaken any nation within that country, weaken them economically or weaken them militarily. Yeah. So Iran, in that context, is just seen as a threat. Yeah. They can't stand it. Same thing with Iraq. This is why they pushed America to remove Saddam Hussein, Iraq, even though he was a secular dictator. Yeah. Yeah. He made statements like, Bashar al-Assad and Hafiz al-Assad before, and they used to make statements against Israel, but they used to make those statements as a way for internal population, for internal control. It was never actually anything to do with, being actually against Israel and the state of Israel. But the fact that they were a potential power at one time, 1991, you remember the number of army that the Americans used to talk about, that the Iraqi army was 2 million. Yeah. It was building supposedly weapons of mass destruction in the 1990s, and then
Right.
it got decommissioned later on. So for them, for Israel, it's the case that Iran are a strong potential strong power, and they need them to be weakened within that region. And by weakening them within that region, then they see that this is a way of maintaining their dominance. Yeah, their strategic, military, and economic dominance within that region. Yeah,
Sheikh, last question. It's I know it's already 6:30 here. The Sheikh, I'm sure Pakistan is watching this because the missiles are flying over Pakistan to hit Iran. Um, uh, Look, Sheikh, the generals that were killed, um, the scientists that have been killed. I don't know. I mean, if this is happening, let's say in the minds of the generals or the army itself, that they were trying to avoid this fate. They were trying to avoid going to war. They were trying to avoid dying. Uh, they want to stay in power. They wanted to stay in power, and because of all of this, they did everything possible not to defend the Muslims of Gaza. And Subhanallah, they died anyway. They're humiliated, and uh, they are at war. Everything that they were trying to avoid. Uh, Sheikh, I mean, do you think this? Is there any thought process in the minds of the people, who are running, Iran, that you know, at the end of the day, they're in some 6 foot hole anywhere, but they
yeah.
could have died more honorable death defending Gaza, and if not, uh, I mean, whatever it is that they were trying to avoid, they couldn't avoid it. And the other question, Sheikh, regarding Pakistan, you think is there any lessons to be learned for Pakistan uh, if Iran is finished? I mean, the only threat, the only, let's say, viable threat to that region, or that still has something that the Muslim world can look up to, is either Turkey or Pakistan. And there is no way that they will not try to neutralize uh, Pakistan. So, what do you think, Sheikh? What yani,
Yeah.
lessons learned for the Muslims of Pakistan and even Iran
Lessons need to be
or
learned.
Egypt, even?
Yeah, but yeah, exactly. And this is the thing. The lessons need to be learned throughout the whole of that region. Whether that is Pakistan, whether that is Egypt, whether it's the Gulf countries, they're in a situation where, as this is the thing, we as Muslims, we have witnessed for the last 18 months to 2 years now a genocide and massacre against the Muslims of Gaza. What message does that send out to the rest of the world? It says that you can kill Muslims. Their blood is cheap. Nobody will come to their aid. And therefore, a threat to the Gaza, Muslims of Gaza is a threat to Muslims all around the world.
Mm,
It just says that your blood is cheap. Nobody's going to defend them. And in fact, the reality is, and I really honestly believe this, is that the reason why India tried to attack Pakistan is because you know, they took what they saw with Gaza and they thought, yeah, we can do that to Pakistan as well.
mm. Really, you think they actually thought? I mean, that was the assessment of India of Pakistan,
No, not in terms of the fact that they're not, they don't have a air force or things like that, but the arrogance, the
right?
pride
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
that's saying, look, nobody's going to come to the rescue of the Muslims. We can look at what Israel's doing to Gaza. We can do the same thing, you know. to Pakistan. And this is the thing. This is what's going to occur. This is a threat. This is a threat to all Muslims. This
I
is what
mean,
I'm trying to say.
Pakistan has to be thinking, Sheikh. I mean, you have India that is waiting to hit back, or to at least to make sure. And now Israel doing what it's doing to Iran. I mean, India must be thinking, okay, well, I don't know. I mean, there's now some type of a rift between India and United States also, but I mean that's a real player in the game. But it's because I'm thinking really now I'm thinking Pakistan, and I'm saying, they have to, if how, you have India that hates you. You have Israel that was supporting India when India was attacking Pakistan. You have United States that's, I'm just probably looking at Pakistan, the vulnerabilities that exist within Pakistan. In many ways, a strong Iran was probably actually good for Pakistan also. But now here you could be very easily next, Pakistan.
Pakistan could be next. But this is the thing, isn't it? The reality is that nobody wants to see a strong Muslim power in the world.
Mm,
It's the reality. What I mean by nobody, I'm talking about primarily Western nations. They don't want to see a strong Muslim power, including India doesn't want to see that.
of course.
Why? Because even if it's so-called secular, the fact is that Islam represents a worldview distinct to theirs, an economy distinct to theirs, an understanding of a vision which is distinct to theirs. And so a strong Muslim society, strong Muslim state has a potential to revive itself according to Islam
Mm,
and develop itself according to Islam. And then it becomes a real threat. So that's why there is a constant push to weaken Muslims, whether that will be Iran at this moment in time, whether that's been Egypt prior to that, whether that was carving up the Muslim world into small little statelets,
Sudan and Iraq.
exactly. Sudan being carved up,
Yeah,
South Sudan,
yeah,
North
yeah.
Sudan, Libya
Darfur.
potential breakup, Yemen potential breakup as well. So we can see that this is a situation. They don't want to see any potential rival because they don't just think about 2, 3, 5 years, 10 years in time. They're talking about 50 years, 100 years, 200 years when they think about their vision. So they're looking at that. So they see this. But I want you, the listeners to understand this, which is Israel only did what it did because it was able to use Jordanian airspace, both to fly over its planes as well as also to be a buffer and use its airspace to shoot down or help shoot down Iranian missiles.
Right.
It can only do what it does because it knows it's secured its border with Egypt. Nothing's going to happen to itself. It can only do what it does because it knows that Egypt will allow, trade routes that can go through the Suez Canal to Israeli ports, or that Jordan will allow traded goods to go there, or that Turkey allows pipelines, gas to go and serve Israel's energy needs. So it knows this. It knows that this is how it can operate. And the reason why I make this point is because Israel is in an incredibly weak position. It doesn't make rational sense that Israel has a longevity within that future. And primary reason why is because the population of the people around in those countries, in Egypt, in Jordan, in Syria, in Turkey, absolutely hate the guts of this Zionist entity. The
Yeah.
people, the ordinary masses do. And the only thing that's stopping a real response is these rulers within the Muslim lands who've literally betrayed. How can you betray the Muslims by protecting the Zionist entity committing a genocide by using your own airspace to shoot down, using your own planes,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Jordanian
I
aircraft to
mean,
shoot
the
down?
betrayal is beyond belief, Sheikh.
Yeah,
There's
it's
no
it's
question.
just disgusting. And if me and you can see that living here, people in their country can see it 100%. Yeah. Just like when we had 2010, the Arab Spring, we had 10, well, it was what, 2003, all the way up to 2010. So Iraq invasion, prior to that was Afghanistan, but certainly Iraq invasion, all of that. That mindset within the Ummah was clear. It started to bubble. The betrayal of the rulers, obviously the economic downturn as well within these countries, but the betrayal of the rulers. And I'm saying that whether we see it in the short time, in the next few months, or whether in the next 6, 7, 8 years, there will be there will be a fundamental shift,
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
yeah,
I don't
within
think
these
you have a choice.
regimes. And then the only option that they have is to try to control the revolution like they did in 2010, yeah, or become extremely brutal like they did with regards to Bashar al-Assad in Syria and try to eliminate it in that way. But there's going to be a change. Egypt's unsustainable at this moment in time. Economically,
Yeah.
it's having to sell off its islands to the UAE. Egyptian, they're Egyptian islands that they've sold to make them into the next Dubai, yeah, controlled by the UAE. It's unsustainable. And this is the thing. Israel has to realize, the Zionist entity has to realize that you're you don't have the geography, you don't have the landmass, you don't have the population size, you don't have the demographics. You're surrounded by a hostile people who have witnessed your genocide against their Muslim brothers and sisters. It's unsustainable. So even if Muslims think, oh man, look, they've taken parts of Syria now, they've defeated, taken the southern Lebanon up to the Litani River, and still got troops there. They're now taking out Iran, and look what they've done in Afghanistan, so in Gaza, and they're expanding their settlements in the West Bank. The Muslim world is defeated. We need to realize that we're not defeated. It's the fact that we are being led by donkeys, by
Yeah. Yeah.
traitors, and
SubhanAllah.
by cowards that are not allowing us to be the real power and the real, capabilities of this ummah to be unleashed. Really, that's where it is. And I've read and I've seen brothers say, "Oh, Muslims are not strong enough. We don't have the capable armies and things like that." Look, you don't even. The situation is so delicate for the state of Israel. You don't even need to actually have military intervention at this moment in time. If all the countries stopped their use of airspace, waterways, and land routes and pipeline deals to the state of Israel, Israel would have to reverse its policy on Gaza. Yeah. If it continued that position, Israel as a state would no longer function. You block the airspace and you only allow the people who want to leave the country the ability to do so, but no goods can enter that country. It's unsustainable. It's not a sustainable society or a state. If you then turn around and you say that every single American base within the Muslim world, within the Arab world, in that region, has to be removed, what are America going to do? Are they going to fight Jordan, Egypt, Saudi, UAE, Qatar, all these
Yeah. Yeah.
different
And
countries at
Syria
the
and
same
Egypt
time?
and yeah,
Yeah,
Libya and
exactly. They
and the
can't.
rest of the Muslim world on top of
It's
it. Yeah.
unsustainable. In fact, when Gaddafi came to power, one of the key concerns was the Wheeler base, which was an American base in Libya, and Gaddafi called for the removal of that, and they had to remove themselves because it was either that or go to war with Gaddafi, and they couldn't afford it, and they saw it as not strategically advantageous at the time. The point being is that the Muslim world is not weak. It's just the fact that we've allowed our countries to be infiltrated and dominated by the West and their hegemonic interests through the Arab rulers and the Muslim rulers within our lands. This is where the problem is. The problem isn't the fact that we don't have the capability, we do. And what I just said about in terms of boycotting, cutting off airspace, cutting off land routes, cutting off sea routes, I've not even talked about military intervention in that situation, have I? I've just said call for the removal of all the air base, all the military bases, and cut off the supply lines and supply routes to Israel. It's unsustainable. Then if you target the 9 power plants, you've now crippled their energy within that country. You now target the 5 desalination plants within Israel. You've now removed the access to clean water. Yeah. And
All
I'm
right,
just saying from
Sheikh.
a strategic point of view, this is what could be thought of. But this requires a will. Yeah. And unfortunately, it's not the case that the Ummah doesn't have the will. It's the fact that the rulers, and it's not even just cowardice. It's not just cowardice with the rulers. It's complicity. They're complicit. Yeah, they want this to. They want to see the state of affairs to occur. Yeah, it's not
Oh,
that
it's
they want to
that's
get rid of it and they can't. Incapable. They're complicit in it.
right. I mean, that's why they're there. All right, Sheikh. This is we have another 15 minutes before, and we have to pray Asr also. But
Yeah,
Jazakallah khair, Sheikh,
alhamdulillah.
for your time and for this. And I know it was very quick, just because of the situation the way it is, and many lessons learned from this. And as I said, these things, Gaza is still happening, and while it's happening, Iran is, and Subhanallah, all of these things are happening, and I'm sure there are people within the Muslim armies that can hopefully Muslim armies, intellectuals, Muslims, scholars, sincere Muslims in the Ummah are looking at this and saying this can't be sustainable. And I think even when we look at the convoy that's coming all the way from Tunis, and Muslims are trying. We can, yani, Subhanallah, we're seeing that the Ummah is trying its best. It's trying to get out of this mess that it's in. It's just that I think the movers and shakers within these societies have to see and look at the points that you are presenting. This is not impossible. And Alhamdulillah, I think the Ummah is at crossroads. When that change will occur, I'm not sure, but it obviously is in a very painful situation. I mean, and we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that really, Sheikh, that, this is, uh, to see the kind of people that we are losing on a daily basis. I mean, I'm not even talking about the regime. I mean, I think, no one cares about this regime. We want these regimes to fall. But the kind of people that we keep losing due to the incompetencies of these regimes, the kind of intellectuals, the kind of scientists, the kind of people that could be so useful for this ummah for the sake of really nothing, Sheikh. Subhanallah. This is why, it's painful time, Sheikh. It's painful time, to be very honest. But again, Jazakallah khair, Sheikh. And hopefully we'll bring you back again to see where this situation goes. I really don't want to see Pakistan to be the next target, but I'm worried it could be. All right, Akhi. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Alaikum salam to that.
Salam.